Welcome all. We are very lucky to have Chris Duffy with us this morning for our talk. Now, Chris is the senior lecturer at Queen Mary University and is also director of admissions for the School of Biological and Chemical Sciences. And he is going to be speaking to us today about a career pathway towards biological and chemical sciences. Now, as you may have done a talk already this morning, if you have any queries, please do put them in the chat. Remember that we are being recorded, so please keep it clear and short and to the point. Chris is going to be presenting, and so he won't be able to see the questions, so I will be sort of moderating the questions as we go. Okay, over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Just give me a moment while I share my screen and start my presentation. Here we go. Right, so first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for listening to me and inviting me to speak on this Careers Day. As was said, my name is Chris Duffy. I'm a senior lecturer in cellular and molecular biology is my formal title, but we'll see later that that's a bit of a confusing title. And I'm also the director of admissions for my department. So if any of you apply to do biological or chemical sciences at Queen Mary, I'll probably read your personal statement with UCAS. So just a little bit about kind of what I do as a scientist, really. I think people don't maybe have a clear idea of what a scientist actually is. They tend to think we stand in labs with white coats on, and actually, well, I'm rarely in the lab, but that's a very incomplete picture anyway. So what I do is one of the first things I do as a university lecturer is I teach. My teaching is in quantum mechanics for chemists. Sounds like a horrible topic, but actually it's one of the most popular in the school. I also teach maths for chemists and biochemists. That's a little bit less popular, I'll be honest. People don't really like maths. And I also teach membrane proteins and bioenergetics to the third-year biochemists. That's not even the biggest part of my job, actually. It's the part of the job, I'll be honest, I enjoy the most. But the biggest part of my job is I'm a researcher. So I'm a research PI, a principal investigator. And what that means is I manage a research group, and this is my current team: Callum, Tejan, Vitautas, Kieran. They're either kind of people who are doing PhDs or already have PhDs. They're my research team. And basically we conduct research in my area of interest, which is photosynthesis. And what we do is we kind of apply for government grants and we carry out projects and we discover things, and then we typically write that up into a paper. This one's published by the Royal Society of Chemistry. And we publish our results in the journals, and they're read by other scientists. And we hopefully, in a small way, try and contribute to our understanding of kind of molecular processes and the chemical world around us. The other thing I do is obviously admin, and I'm the director of admissions for my department, undergraduate admissions. So this is involved in UCAS applications. But other than that, I do a few other things. So outreach, like today. So I love going to kind of schools and talking about science, because I absolutely love science. And occasionally I'm kind of asked to comment in the popular science press on kind of research issues and things like that. So that's kind of what the job of a scientist actually is. Where do I work? Well, I work at Queen Mary, University of London, and I gather you've probably already listened to talks by some of my colleagues. So Queen Mary is in the East End of London. It's what we call a Russell Group university. It's a member of the Russell Group, which is a kind of group of very research-intensive universities. How good a research output a university produces is judged by something called the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, and it's assessed every 6 years or so. So the last time it was assessed, we were rated 5th in the UK. So we do a lot of research. All of the lecturers are also kind of scientific researchers. We've won 9 Nobel Prizes as an institution. The majority of them, I think, are in medicine and kind of material science / chemistry. And we're quite a large campus. We've got 25,000 students, and they represent about 163 countries, I think, at the last count. So kind of wonderfully diverse place to kind of work. I love it. This is just a kind of map. This is where we're kind of based in the East End and in the city centre as well. I'm based at the Mile End campus. Actually, that's a lie. I've just moved to the Whitechapel campus, which is about 15 minutes up the road. But anyone wanting to do biological and chemical science, that's typically done in this building here. In Whitechapel, we have our kind of teaching hospitals, same in Charterhouse Square. where we have Barts, and we've got our legal chambers in the city. But all of the kind of pure subjects, the traditional subjects, are taught in Mile End. And this is what our buildings look like. Actually, as a department, we have two buildings. Very broadly, we have the Fogg building. Fogg was a very famous plant scientist. This is where we teach our biology and our psychology. And then we have the Joseph Priestley building. Hopefully any chemists in the audience know who Joseph Priestley is, very famous chemist. This is where our chemistry and biochemistry is taught. And we also do a lot of teaching in concert with the medical school as well, so our biomedical science programs. As I said, all of the lecturers, or most of the lecturers at least, are research scientists as well. And really kind of what we teach is almost up to us really as a lecturer. We kind of we have a kind of a core syllabus of things we have to teach, but generally we get a lot of freedom, and what we tend to teach is our research interests. So in biochemistry, we're researchers in structural biology, chromosomes, and cytoskeletal networks. That's what this picture is here, this little microscopic fluorescence microscopy image of the cytoskeleton. Photosynthesis and bioenergetics, that's me, that's what I do. I'm also involved in chemistry in the physical and computational chemistry department. But our chemistry department does nanomaterials, so things like making nano building materials, making new kind of catalysts for very kind of selective chemical reactions and things like that. And we have our biology department. A friend of mine works on starfish. This is invertebrate neurobiology. But we do things like evolutionary genetics, animal networks, and ecology, and a lot of microbial ecology as well. That's why, unfortunately, one of the floors of the Fogg building stinks, because it's full of microbes that kind of smell like eggs. But the research is very, very interesting. Right at the top of the Fogg building, we have our psychology department as well. We're kind of fairly unique in that our approach to psychology is very, very molecular. It's very kind of structure-based rather than therapeutic. So we do things like animal psychology. We have beehives on the roof, and we study kind of how bees make decisions, and hopefully that tells us about how humans make decisions and things like that. And we have kind of people researching perception and decision making, and also kind of positive psychology, how we can have a healthy psychology, and also kind of where psychology can go wrong a little bit. We're also very deeply involved in kind of health research as well. It's very relevant at the moment. So in Whitechapel, we have our Blizzard Institute, where we teach cell biology. Very relevant at the moment with the vaccine rollout for COVID-19. We've got immunobiology research, and we do things like neuroscience, brain surgery, things like that. Genomics, which is kind of like a data science. It's a computational approach to studying population genetics, and also things like public healthcare. Actually kind of clinical applications of all of this research. How do you turn scientific research into techniques for making the population healthier and happier? So kind of that's the kind of research we do. What do we teach? So if you want to if you're interested in biological or chemical sciences, that's a very, very broad topic, actually. That covers a lot of things. And we offer kind of different programs that are all essentially biological science, or all essentially kind of biological and chemical science, but they reflect different specializations. So the first one we do is actually just biological science. This is very, very kind of broad and very flexible. And often we call this organismal biology. So this is learning about whole organisms, whole kind of animals, humans, plants, etc. And the emphasis is on things like physiology, anatomy, and also on genetics, and even the interactions between different organisms, so ecology. They study really interesting things like ecology in the first year, cell biology, and genetics in the second year, neuroscience in the third year. This isn't exhaustive. These are just examples of the kind of things you can study. And the thing about the biologist is they're always traveling. They never seem to be in one place. So they kind of... This is in the first year, the biology students are in Somerset doing some field work. And in the second year, some of the students, they're in, I believe this is Croatia. And recently, Borneo in the third year, where they do tropical ecology and conservation. So they seem to have a lot of fun. They're always outdoors. They're always wearing shorts. They're always kind of quite suntanned and things like that. What I teach on, or partially, I teach on several things, is biochemistry. So if you're interested in biology, but you really kind of want to look more at the kind of the inner workings of it, the molecular forces that determine how biological systems function, then we have a biochemistry program. And in biochemistry, as I say, this is where we somewhat obviously, where we apply the concepts of chemistry and sometimes physics to understand kind of how complicated biological systems function and how they develop. And more recently, in the last kind of 20 years, this has kind of emerged as a field in which we not only try and understand biological systems, but we actually try to build complex systems of our own based on the things that we learn from biology. For example, what I study is photosynthesis. And the reason I study photosynthesis is I'm interested in producing very, very efficient solar technology. So we look to how plants harvest light energy to try and understand about how maybe we can harvest light energy. And again, biochemistry, the flavor of this biology is much more focused on molecules. So you do things like cell biology, kind of speaks for itself, the kind of functions of the inside of cells. This is some fluorescence microscopy on cells. This is my colleague Isa took these images. She's very interested in kind of these very small green structures, the cytoskeletal structures inside the cells. You might actually be more interested in kind of abstract informational approaches to this. So rather than looking at things physically, you might want to kind of understand how they interact in a slightly more kind of abstract way. Anyone doing a biology A level might have seen this before. This is the citric acid cycle. So this is what we call a metabolic pathway. This is a very complicated interaction between a network of enzymes and substrates that ultimately leads to, well, this is the Krebs cycle. This is how we metabolize glucose. And then we have some really applied elements to this. Is can we take all of the things we learn about complicated biological systems and understand why they go wrong, and hopefully when they go wrong, how we can fix them and make them right. So my colleague John Viles studies Alzheimer's disease and basically how certain proteins, which are known as kind of A beta proteins, I think, and tau fibrils, things like that, how these proteins, which are detected in the plaques inside the brain associated with Alzheimer's disease, how these proteins may be interacting with cellular environments around them to cause Alzheimer's disease. And this is one of my students, Alyssa. She did biochemistry with us. She got very, very interested in Alzheimer's disease, and she's now at Cambridge, I believe. She's working in the Alzheimer's Research Institute. This is a genuine picture of someone actually working in the lab. This wasn't staged. We took this while she was doing some biochemistry. And the good thing about biochemistry is actually biochemistry students get to do a final year research project, which is actually they get to join one of the labs and carry out research. We also have biomedical science. I've kind of grouped these together. This isn't my area of expertise, but we have biomedical science, neuroscience, pharmacology, and medical genetics. So again, this is a slightly different flavor of biology. This is where we take our understanding of biology and molecular biology particularly, but also physiological biology, and we apply it very specifically to human health and pathology. So we're trying to understand, again, with biochemistry, complex systems, but now the complex system we're really interested in is the human body. And you get to do all kinds of interesting stuff here. Again, it depends on which degree program you're interested in, but molecular genetics. So what I mean by molecular genetics is actually the physical structure of DNA, how it moves, how it's replicated, etc. In the second year, you do physiology, but here we've got cardiovascular and respiratory physiology. So it's a very specific kind of animal physiology. It's the human circulatory system. And we have a third year module called functional genomics. So just as in the first year, you study DNA as a physical molecule, as an actual object that moves around inside the cell. In the third year, you start to study it from a more abstract point of view as information, as data. And this is a field called genomics, and it's a huge kind of emerging field at the moment that involves artificial intelligence and complex data networks and things. Last, I realize this is starting to sound a bit like a list, but kind of we have chemistry and also psychology to go. Chemistry, the traditional subject, one of our pure subjects, and we have two flavors of that: pure chemistry and pharmaceutical chemistry. So obviously pharmaceutical chemistry is slightly more aimed at drug design and things like this. And this really is understanding matter at its absolute most fundamental level in terms of atoms and atomic bonds. And the reason we do this is we want to create new materials, new drugs, new kind of colorants, odorants, foods, fibers, everything like that. And really chemistry is the science of exerting control over matter at its absolute smallest level, at the level of the atom. And we do a lot of kind of interesting things. Depends whether you're really interested in fundamental science, but in the first year you'll study inorganic chemistry. Actually, inorganic chemistry is really important for medicine. A lot of the proteins in our body are actually metalloproteins. They actually contain or coordinate metals. And a lot of poisons and drugs work by displacing or interacting somehow with those metals. So inorganic chemistry sounds really dry, but actually it has a huge link to biology and biochemistry. I put this module in because this is the one I teach, quantum and physical chemistry. We'll get into why I teach this. I'm not a traditional biologist or traditional chemist by any definition, but I teach introduction to quantum mechanics. Every year the students arrive and they've read the title and they absolutely dread it because they think, I want to do chemistry, I don't want to do physics, this is awful. But it's always the module that wins the teaching awards. They absolutely love it. And in this, basically, you try and understand chemistry from the fundamental forces of nature. So the interactions between electrons and nuclei. And actually, the point of this is to be able to do chemistry on a computer, to be able to do simulated chemistry. And this is a huge part of drug design. And materials design is designing things on a computer first via simulation before you then go into the actual physical synthesis. And of course, synthesis, is still a huge part of chemistry. And my friend Chris, he teaches organic synthesis, how you make these incredibly complicated molecules. And they're often things like drugs or building materials and things like this. So that's a very, very interesting topic. This is my student, Nathan. This is a completely staged photograph. So this is him looking kind of quite dreamily at some green liquid in a tube. But he really doesn't like the mathematics part of chemistry, but absolutely loves the kind of hands-on organic synthesis. And this is him having a great time. He's about to graduate. And last but not least, this is the last one, and we'll go on to something different. We have psychology, and it's weird. Psychology stands out as a bit of a weird addition into our department. We've got biology and chemistry, and then we have the science of the mind. But as I think I said before, psychology, or certainly our approach to psychology, is very molecular. It's about how the physical structures inside the mind and inside the cells that make up kind of the brain, how they determine decision making and thinking and things like this, and of course how it can go wrong, pathological psychology, etc. And again, that's a very broad topic. So when you do a psychology degree, you can actually pick your different options and how you want to, what area of psychology you want to go into. So in the first year, you might learn about brain and behavior. This is one of our bees with a little antenna glued to its back. I'm told it's fine. They don't mind this. We have the world expert on bees, Lars Chitka, in our department. And he uses radar technology to track bee swarms around the country because he's interested in how bee colonies move around and interact with kind of agriculture and things like that. He also does experiments on bees to look at their decision making, and he has them doing all kinds of crazy things like playing football and recognizing pictures of pop stars' faces and things like that. He does some amazing research, and we have our beehives on the roof, which produce an enormous amount of honey, actually, which we don't really know what to do with. So this is kind of behavioral or animal psychology. We've also got abnormal and clinical psychology, which is quite an interesting one. This is looking at the structure of the brain and how it changes during things like depression or periods of isolation, etc. And of course, we have cognitive neuroscience. This is a little more kind of traditional psychology. This is actually how the molecular processes in the brain work together and emerge as ultimately behavior and decisions. Kind of what are the molecular processes that govern our decision making. Very good. So again, biological science, chemical science, a very, very broad tent with lots of different flavors in it. And if you come to Queen Mary or any university really to study these, how you study will change as you go through the years. So let's take for an example biology. Let's say you do a degree in biological science. This is kind of what a typical week might look like for you. You know, this might look a little different straight out of sixth form. One of the first things you see is there's a lot of empty space there. So on Monday, you might have a lecture in ecology. It's one of your ecology modules. And then you might not have anything in the afternoon or early morning. And then Tuesday, you might have a lecture in physiology. And then the afternoon a practical. And you might have some workshops and tutorials and things like that. These modules that you do in the first year, you'll probably have very little option about which ones you do. These will be the core modules. These are the kind of foundational topics and basics that anyone who wants to study biology has to do. And actually, although this looks like free time, here's where you'll be doing independent study. So the purpose of a lecture is basically to introduce you to a topic, but the majority of your learning takes place outside of the classroom. Of course, you've got workshops and tutorials and things where you practice and have debates and answer questions and things like this. But the majority of your time is spent kind of doing independent study. Of course, you're always welcome to kind of contact your lecturers. We're very friendly and approachable. And I spend a lot of this time talking to people and having discussions with my students and things like this. We're aware in the first year that this is a very new environment, a very new way of working for a lot of people. So we're kind of it's very guided. Your independent study is very guided, and we're always there to help you. As you go through to your third year, you'll specialize. So you think, well, okay, I'm doing a biology degree, but what I'm really interested in is disease. So I want to take a kind of disease specialization in my biology degree. So in the third year, a lot of your modules will be options that you've picked. So you might have picked the molecular basis of disease, infectious disease biology, mammals and evolution, and things like this. And actually, you'll have far more free time. You'll notice I've put here something which I've called research project, journal club, lab meeting. This is because in the third year, on any degree, you will do a research project. So actually, a large number of your credits will come not from traditional sitting in a lecture, taking notes, and then doing an exam, but will come from joining a lab and helping that lab carry out their research. And then at the end of that, you write up your findings in a dissertation, and you give a presentation to the university about the kind of discoveries you've made or the new things you've learned. And this will take up the majority of your time in the third year. And how you timetable this is a kind of discussion you will have with your lab. So, your boss, not me, I don't like starting work at 9, but your boss might decide Monday morning, 9 o'clock, I want to meet everyone, and we're all going to talk about what we did last week. And then you might spend one afternoon, one morning doing research in the lab, kind of with, monitored by PhD students and postdocs and things like that. The lab you join might have a journal club as well, where you all discuss kind of current research and papers you've read, discoveries that you've read that you find interesting. So your third year is much more about kind of how you shape your learning, if that makes sense. Kind of you choose your modules, you join a research group that you're interested in, and you kind of by this point are very, very independent and are using your time completely kind of according to your own kind of wishes and your own organization. That doesn't mean that you're on your own, of course, because when you come to a university, we realize that a degree is stressful and it's a lot of fun, but it's also it's work. So we support you throughout the whole thing. So this is my colleague Natalie, although she left a few years ago, and one of my former students. You have an academic advisor. So all the way through university, you will have someone like me or one of my colleagues who is there in the capacity of an advisor. So not there to teach you anything. Not there to kind of examine you or anything like that, but is there simply to listen to your problems and offer advice. And anyone who's been teaching for more than a few years has basically seen it all. And we're very good at kind of identifying any problems. It might be that you're struggling to organize your time, or that you struggle taking notes in lectures, and we've got techniques and services that can help you with that. We have a student support officer in the department, Shahida. She's amazing, and she can help you if you've got any problems. But we also have a counselling service, and a disability and dyslexia service. I myself am profoundly dyslexic. That's why I went into the degree I went into. I'll tell you about that later. I'm much more mathematical than about the written word. And this service is really, really helpful. So you're not on your own, although you're kind of you're organizing your own work schedule. You're doing it with a lot of help against this background of support. So that's fine. Okay, you've picked your degree, and you've gone to university, and you've picked your specialization. And you decided, okay, this is the kind of science I enjoy, and you graduate. And this is one of my classes. This is a picture I took a couple of years ago. This is in the middle is my student Karina. She's now at UCL studying, I believe, gerontology, which is the kind of the biochemistry of how we get old. So you graduate, and what do you do with your degree? So obviously a graduate, if you've got a graduate, you're going to have specialist knowledge in your subject. So if you did biology, you're going to know a lot about biology. If you did chemistry, you're going to know loads about chemistry, etc. And you're also probably going to have practical skills. In your third year, you've probably, you might have learned how to do atomic force microscopy, or how to use a confocal microscope, or how to, do gel electrophoresis, or things like that. And that's fine. So you've got all this specialist knowledge, but actually probably even more important than that is you have a load of transferable skills. First and foremost of that is problem solving. By the time you're in the third year, you're probably an expert problem solver. When you graduate, your brain is really sharp. It's like a razor blade, and you can look at problems, dissect them, take them apart, reassemble them, and deal with all kinds of complex problems. You'll probably also have all these other kind of skills that are kind of adjacent to your degree, but not directly related to it. So you'll probably be able to kind of write code in Python or R. You'll probably also be very good at statistical analysis. If you've studied genetics, you probably understand how to build a basic AI. And also throughout your degree, you'll have learned how to write science, how to give a presentation, how to explain very, very complicated ideas in a very simple way to non-experts. And all of these kind of these science adjacent skills are incredibly desirable in terms of career. And I'm going to talk in a second about my career path, which was a little bit strange. So it's kind of, don't just think because that you've got a degree in biology that what you are now is a biologist. Yes, you could become a biologist, but you've also got this entire palette of other skills. Just bear with me a moment. I'm just going to do that and check my time. Okay, I'm all right for time. Thanks. There we go. So deciding what you want to do is obviously it's not easy at any age, quite frankly. But it's particularly not easy kind of when you're fresh out of university. And again, fortunately, we've got services to help you. We've got our careers guidance service. At any university, you'll have something like this. You can book an appointment with a kind of advisor. They'll put you in touch with companies or tell you about kind of recruitment events in the city. In London, there's loads of recruitment events and things like that. And interestingly, and they're very underutilized for some reason, we have a load of completely free workshops and lessons. We even have a writing workshop. So you can go on a writer's retreat, spend a couple of days learning how to write. And these workshops have won awards, and most students don't seem to be aware of them. But again, you've got all these kind of, if you want to develop a skill in something as simple as using Excel, then there are workshops you can do to develop all of these other skills that are going to help you when you choose a career. All of our departments have a dedicated kind of career guidance person. This is MJ, my colleague. She works in our department, Biological Chemical Sciences, and she's a careers consultant. And she's always organizing events and getting kind of people from companies to come and talk to our students about things. It's really, really useful. And it's a really important part of our job at university and your role at university. You're not just doing a degree. You're actually kind of developing the skills you need to do a career that you find, rewarding and interesting and fun. And actually 90 odd % of our graduates are employed kind of 6 months after graduation. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the various things they do. And to cut a long story short, it's essentially anything, but we can have a look at kind of our destinations, really. Number one, and this isn't the most common, this is in no particular order, is research and academia. So a lot of our students, when they graduate with their bachelor's degree, go into further study with the aim of becoming, like me, a scientist, an academic scientist. And typically what you do is you do your degree in maybe biochemistry. And then you could pick a master's. You might be interested in structural biology, X-ray crystallography, things like that. Or you might want to do the kind of more data science, bioinformatics. This is genetics as information rather than genetics as molecules. Or you might want to do biotechnology. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list. There'll be all kinds of options for kind of further study. And then you do your master's and you think, actually, that's still not enough. What I really want to do is I want to do a PhD. And PhDs are very specific. They're projects on anything. And they might have titles like molecular basis of Alzheimer's disease, artificial intelligence techniques for proteomics, photosynthesis on extrasolar planets. That sounds silly, but that's a project I'm involved with the physics department, looking at whether there's planets on other planets. So your PhD is very, very specific. And again, how you get into a particular PhD is not linear. So there are many ways into it. You might come from biotechnology or bioinformatics or structural biology. So as you go on, you get a bit more specialized. But the pathway through is never linear. You're never really cutting off any options for yourself. And once you get a PhD like me, then you become a postdoc. So you do research for a few years, and eventually you'll get a permanent academic position. And with that, you're then allowed to develop your own research ideas and apply for grants and things like that. A big destination for us, particularly people who do biomedical science degrees, is it's about 40%. They go on to graduate entry medicine or dentistry. So that's a 4-year program for graduates to become physicians, medical doctors. Now that doesn't mean that you have to do biomedical science if you want to do graduate entry medicine. Actually, I personally have sent advisees to do medicine from biochemistry, biology, chemistry, and in fact, all of our programs. Quite a lot of my students go, for some reason, from biochemistry to dentistry. I don't know why. But all of our programs are kind of a route into medicine, if that's what you want to do afterwards. We have Barts in the London, our 2 hospitals, and we send a lot of our students kind of to those teaching hospitals where they then become doctors. This is the Blizzard Institute. I now work just opposite this in the Digital Environment Research Institute, but this is our kind of medical research center and teaching hospital. Quite a few of our students as well, so they don't necessarily want to be an academic scientist, so they don't want to teach at a university, they don't want to kind of do pure research, they maybe want to do something a bit more practical, and this is often what we call institutional research or institutional science. This is basically publicly funded research and development. So you work at an institute, you can do all this research, but you don't teach. They're not teaching institutions. Often they're focused on analytics, so they do a lot of analysis. Prime example now is the kind of institutions that correlate all the data associated with infection and transmission of COVID-19. That'll all be done at an institutional level rather than an academic level. Often they do services for academic research. So often if I want an experiment carried out for me, or I want some very high level computing done, things like that, what we'll do is we'll go to an institution. So there's the supercomputing facility Archer, which sometimes we'll run calculations on. Or there are things like Diamond, which is our synchrotron in the UK, or the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, etc. And the other thing some of our students do is policy formation. So, okay, we've got science, there's this new research, there's a new type of medical treatment, whatever. Actually, what we need to now do is implement it. How do we bring this into society? How do we implement a new form of medicine into the National Health Service? This is what we call policy and implementation. So this is a slightly different area of science. It's to do with kind of how we manage science and how we do science as a society rather than as an individual lab. And these are some of the destinations for my students: National Health Service, obviously, Great Ormond Street, the Medical Research Council, Genomics England, and like I said, RAL and Diamond. These are our particle physics centers, but actually most biochemists at some point will have something to do with the Diamond lab, because if you want to know what a protein looks like, what its structure is, you can do some structural work at the Diamond laboratories, and of course the civil service as well. Some people just want to go into industry. not kind of research. I want to actually, how do we take science and produce it on a large scale? So this could be product research and development, so food science, things like this, scaling up and designing protocols. Okay, you know, this academic in his lab can make one little device on his bench. How do we make 1 million of these a day? This is what we call scaling up. And quality assurance and testing and things like this. These are all jobs for scientists in industry, project management, marketing, etc. And this year we sent a couple of people to Iran. This is a chemical company. They've got loads of sub companies, and I think the student that went here works in cosmetics, so they make chemicals for the cosmetics industry. Shivom, this is data services for medicine and research. So actually, these are AI people, and rather than do it in-house, you can just pay these guys to do your data crunching. Corteva, and they're a company that sells kind of pesticides and seeds and mutant plants and things like that. And even one guy who went to work for the Beavertown Brewery. This was a few years ago. He is their quality assurance guy, so he manages their lab. And I think that's excellent. He makes a lot of money, actually. And finally, like I said, really, you know, what can you do with a science degree? Pretty much anything. As I said, you know, I'm not doing down the humanities or anything like that. You know, I think they're wonderful, but with a STEM degree, you know, very few doors are closed to you, I think, as a problem solver and a creative thinker. So just 3 examples is 3 of our former students who went to work in banking, who work for professional services companies, Ernst & Young, UBS, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Again, not really in any way related to science. These are kind of financial service and accountancy firms, but you know, because they can think at this level, because they can solve these problems, they're very, very desirable to these big corporations. So again, I'm just going to, just quickly check time. I think I'm all right. This is the last part. What I want to talk about is how do you choose a career? And the reason I want to talk about this is certainly when I was at school, kind of 20 years ago, I had a very distorted idea of how university and then your career works, actually. And what I think, and I think a lot of sixth form students I talk to think this, you have these subjects, biology, chemistry, physics, maths, engineering, whatever, and you pick them. So these are your degrees. And if you pick biology, you can go into a biology job. And if you pick chemistry, you go into a chemistry job, and et cetera, et cetera. If you pick maths, you can become an accountant. And things like this. So it's very linear. There's a very linear relationship between the degree you do and the job you can have afterwards. And this causes, I think, a lot of stress in A-level students, because they think, well, okay, if I pick one, let's say I pick chemistry, that wipes out all the other options. That's it. I'm locked in. At the age of 18, I'm locked into being a chemist. And that couldn't be further from the truth, actually. I mean, hopefully I showed you that with some examples of where our graduates have gone. But what I'm going to do is actually talk about my own, kind of very briefly, my own career path, which was a little unusual, actually. So how did I become a biologist? How did I become so my proper title is Senior Lecturer in Cellular and Molecular Biology. And I teach chemistry. So the first thing I'll say is I don't have a degree in biology, and I don't even have an A level in chemistry. In fact, my sixth form teacher said I was dangerously incompetent in the lab. That was the term they used. So I went to school in the Northeast. You could probably tell from my accent, St. Robert's, St. Bob's, sixth form, and I did my A levels in biology, maths, and physics. I thought it was all right. I did all right. I think I got 2 A's and a B. I got a B in physics. I was all right. School was okay, but I was a bit lazy, if I'm being honest. So I got my AAB. So I sensibly decided, well, I'm going to do a degree in the subject that I got a B in. So I went to Sheffield University in 2001, and I studied physics. And actually, at the end of my first year, I converted to theoretical physics. So theoretical physics is a degree in maths and physics, basically. And university couldn't have been more different to school. I loved university. I finally felt like I knew who I was and what I was doing. So I did very well at university. I got my first class degree and things like this. And a guy called William Barford, who was one of the lecturers there, said, would you like to do a PhD with me? And I did a PhD on quantum theory of natural light harvesting. That sounds a bit weird. It probably doesn't mean much to you. But what it was actually quite an interesting project. It was applying quantum physics to studying plant photosynthesis. And the reason I was doing that is because I met this chap. This is my best friend, Sasha, Professor Alexander Rubin, one of the most recognized plant scientists in the world, actually. He's a plant scientist at Queen Mary. And he was very interested in, as a plant scientist, in the physics behind photosynthesis. And in particular, he wanted to kind of explain some confusing experimental data. And so when I did my PhD, we kind of worked together on this project to try and understand photosynthesis from the view of a physicist. And actually, when I finished my PhD, I decided what I really liked was biology. I thought biology was fascinating. I thought as a physicist, I could either go into particle physics and go and work for CERN, or sit and spend the rest of my life scribbling away on my whiteboard about superstrings and things like that. Or I could look at biology, and I found biology absolutely fascinating. So I decided to continue in that vein. Unfortunately, when I finished my PhD, it was 2008. It was the financial crisis. There weren't any science jobs, so I went to work for a software company. Again, this is what I mean. So I'd done physics. I'd also become very, very good at computer programming as a kind of side effect. And I worked for a Belgian software company, financial software called Calatai and Wooters. And I don't want to do them down. They were recently bought out by another big company. They were great, wonderful people, but I just found it boring. I didn't like kind of the financial industry. I find money quite boring as a concept. And I was very unhappy for a year. And I remember friends would say, "What are you doing now?" When I would lie, I'd say I was a scientist. I wouldn't tell them I made accountancy software. Because I felt like I was a scientist. Inside, I was a scientist. That's who I was. Not just my job. I am a scientist. Fortunately, Professor Rubin and I had written a grant application, and after a year, it was funded. So I got to go to Queen Mary as a researcher, as what we call a postdoctoral research associate. And I had the very weird experience in 2009 of being a theoretical physicist working in a biology department. And people didn't really know what I was doing there, or who I was, or why I was there. But turns out I kind of completely fell in love with biology. And I also fell in love with Queen Mary, and I fell in love with London. And so, against all expectations, I became in 2013 a biology lecturer, having never done a degree in biology and not even having an A-level in chemistry. And I love this job. I love being a scientist. I get to research my own topics. I decide what I'm interested in, what I research. I pick my own research team. As long as I get grants, I can do what I want. I get to teach, which is an incredible privilege. I get to teach the next generation of scientists, and I have enormous freedom. I haven't worn a tie since 2009. I can work my own hours. I can do my own thing, and it's truly a privilege to be a scientist. But as you can see, my pathway to becoming a biologist was a bit circuitous and weird. And this is what I want to say to you, actually, when you're thinking about a career in science, is at school, and for good reasons, this isn't a criticism of school, but for good reasons, school teaches you subjects. So it teaches you the sciences. In the science, you've got physics, chemistry, and biology. And they're separate but related disciplines. And you've also got technology, maybe engineering and information technology, and the humanities, politics, sociology, economics, etc. And you've got other subjects like maths and psychology. But these are very separate. And I think that, and this is fine, this is necessary, but it gives an incorrect impression of what science is actually like. When you go to university, you will see actually there's a lot more kind of in between. You don't just have physics, but you might have theoretical physics, which is maths and physics, or physical chemistry, which is a mixture of chemistry and physics. You might have things like biotechnology, which is engineering and biology, neuroscience, all of these kind of unusual mixtures. So actually these somewhat artificial barriers between the disciplines starts to blur at universities. You start to specialize. And actually, once you're beyond university, once you are a scientist, you stop thinking in terms of subjects. I don't know a single scientist who is a chemist or a physicist or a biologist. They're always some weird mixture of different things. And that's because the way we approach science is we think in terms of problems. I don't think what physics am I going to do? I think what problem do I want to solve? So say you want to help fight climate change. How do you fight climate change? What degree do you need to fight climate change? Well, actually, anyone can fight climate change. It's such a big problem that we're going to need engineers, biotechnologists, chemical engineers, biologists. to solve it. But we're also going to need people like IT experts. There's a huge amount of data that needs to be analyzed. So we're going to need people who work with AI. We're going to need psychologists to understand how climate change affects human behavior. And we're also going to need politicians and people who study political science to actually tell us how, not just scientifically or technologically, how we fight climate change, but how as a society we do that. We're going to need economists. And of course, one of the most important jobs that exists, second only to the people that till the fields, teachers, people who work in education who can pass on this knowledge to the next generation. So my one bit of advice, if you want to take advice from me, is to think like this, is to don't think what subject am I good at? Think what problem is it that I want to solve? What do I want to do? And you will find there are many ways to that end goal. There are many, many paths to do that. So you don't have to become, if you want to fight climate change, you don't have to do a degree in climate science. You know, there are many, many ways to do this. I think I've waffled on enough. Thank you ever so much for listening. If you want to have some information on our entry requirements, if you want to hear from our alumni what being a science undergraduate was like, you can talk to our alumni. You can talk to our current students on UniBuddy. And of course, you can email me, c.duffy@qmul.ac.uk. Hopefully there's time for questions. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. Where are we? There we go.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. That was very enlightening. I'm sure that 10th Nobel Prize is on its way. And I do like the illustration you gave of how knowledge and understanding is all on a continuum. And at A levels and at GCSE as well, it's very siloed as subjects. But you're so right. Whatever field you go into, it involves multiple disciplinaries. If you're doing anything in the arts and humanities, you will be touching on topics elsewhere. Any questions coming out? Please, can you write them in the chat if you have? I've got a couple. If no one has anything burning. One thing that occurred to me while you were talking, is there any advantage to doing graduate entry for medicine and dentistry that you mentioned?
It's very, very popular. It's very competitive. I mean, there is. So there's the first advantage in that it's an alternative way into medicine. So it's an additional route in addition to the ultra competitive undergraduate medicine, where you have a tiny number of places that go to your 3 A-star students. And I think that's a terrible way to judge people's ability, kind of A levels. I think, when I was 18, I didn't have my I was very kind of chaotic and things like that. And it turns out I just needed a bit more time to kind of mature. And I think the people that do graduate entry medicine have had 3 years of managing their own time, deciding what it is they're interested in, what they're not interested in, living on their own, growing up a little bit. And generally, I think the students who do graduate entry are a lot more focused and realistic, and often a lot less surprised by the rigors and challenges of medicine. I mean, it is well known that actual people who study medicine at university often have quite a high rate of burnout. It's quite a challenge, really, and I think that bit of extra maturity is always good.
Well, I wondered about the sort of wider knowledge base. So you have a good starting point, or something that's a little bit broader than just going straight into medicine or dentistry. Yeah. Okay, that was just the one thing that occurred to me. Okay. Oh, there is a question just coming up. Oh no, it's a point, isn't it? There is also a financial advantage doing graduate entry medicine. Can you enlighten us?
Can you, Natasha? Do you want to come on and enlighten us about that? I'm not particularly sure on the finances. Do you want to type that in? I'm on. Let's unmute her. Hang on, where is she?
Okay, I've got to change her status. Give me a second. Any other questions coming out from the students while I'm trying to change Natasha to being muted? Okay, Tasha, I'm making you a presenter, so that should unmute you.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Natasha.
Sorry, I just wanted to make that point because there is a financial advantage. So graduates who go into medicine, for the most part, would have taken a student loan for their 3-year or 4-year BSc or MSci. The graduate entry program there's an NHS bursary that funds 3 of the 4 years of graduate entry medicine. Whereas if you do the 5-year medical degree program, that NHS bursary is only available for 1 of the years. So you would need to self-fund for the other 4 years. So there is a financial advantage that your students should be aware of.
That's very helpful, and you see that actually overall that does seem like a really good way of getting into medicine for many reasons. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.
Yeah, is there anything else from the students? I can see there's about 15 attendees.
Don't be shy. But if not, if you've got a question later, you can email me if you like.
You put the email in the presentation. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for everyone for attending. I'm going to stop recording in just a second, so I'll just take it from me to say thanks so much for your contribution. I hope that was really enlightening and useful, and that maybe the students will come forward with the odd question subsequently. And thank you very much for listening, all the students.
My pleasure, Dominic, and thank you to all the students. This is, as I say, one of the best part of my jobs is getting to talk to new and nascent scientists. I love it. It's a privilege. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.